With the 2019 season just days away, I've got three players for you that fantasy owners might be a little low on right now. But here in the next few weeks, they're going to be singing a different rendition of Queen's I Want to Break Free. And instead, they're going to be singing I Want to Break Out. Hit that like button. I've got three breakout candidates right here for you. Hey, what's going on? Headliner Nation, Kyle coming to you from the Draft.com studios with another episode of the Fantasy Headliners. And on my last episode, Jake surprised me and just threw those outtakes in at the very end of the episode, one of which I was singing a little bit. So instead of making you wait until the very end, I figured, you know what? We're just going to throw it at the very beginning. So if you stuck through my horrible singing and decided to watch the rest of this episode, I appreciate it. But in this one, we're going to be talking about three breakout candidates for the 2019 season. And for these three players, I picked three guys that, because of the stats that I'll provide to you here in a moment, they offer some potential upside, but fantasy owners might be a little bit lower on them right now. So because of that, if you've already drafted, they are either going to be A, on your waiver wire, or B, you can probably get them pretty cheap in a trade. Or if you have not drafted yet, you can probably get them for a decent discount on draft day. One in particular, you might just be able to wait until waivers run. So with that being said, let's get rolling. Breakout candidates for 2019, and here's your first one. One player that I liked heading into his rookie season was wide receiver Tre'Quan Smith of the New Orleans Saints. Now, when I was looking at Tre'Quan Smith this year, and we've brought up his name a few times on this episode already, there was a few stats here that I just picked recently that I thought to myself, you know what? These are really good stats and could potentially point to some upside in the 2019 season. So what happens with Tre'Quan Smith when they get in the red zone? Well, he can become a valuable weapon for Drew Brees. Even though Tre'Quan Smith didn't have a ton of volume in the 2018 season, when the New Orleans Saints got to the red zone, Tre'Quan Smith became an under-the-radar valuable weapon for Drew Brees. Now, 32.6% of his targets last season were in the red zone. That was seventh highest in the National Football League for wide receivers that played at least 50% of their team's snaps. 28.6% of his receptions last year were in the red zone. That's fifth highest. Now, talking about the red zone, what if we get a little bit closer now into the end zone? 16.3% of his targets last season were in the end zone. That was eighth highest in the NFL. And 10.7% of his receptions were in the end zone. That was ninth highest in the NFL. Not only is he a valuable weapon, or could end up being an even bigger valuable weapon for Drew Brees in the red zone this year, but he has the big play upside as well. 15.25 yards per target. Again, out of wide receivers that played at least 50% of their team snaps, that was 14th highest in the NFL. So for Tre'Quan Smith, couple of different numbers here that give him that upside. Number one, what he does or what he did in the red zone last year and in the end zone last year could factor into this season, especially after you've had an entire year with Drew Brees. You had an entire year in this offense. You had an entire offseason in this offense with Drew Brees. All of these things considered, a lot of these rookie wide receivers that tend to disappoint have that breakout performance in year 2 or 3. Tre'Quan Smith, because of the way he was looked at in the red zone and end zone last season, if he can add a few more touchdowns, that's quite a few fantasy points right there. But again, like I mentioned with his yards per catch, he's a guy that can take the top off the field as well. He can make some big plays. He had that one huge game last year where he scored a couple of touchdowns. But when you have weapons like Michael Thomas, who's very sure-handed all over the field, you've added Jared Cook, you have Alvin Kamara. When you have these weapons, Tre'Quan Smith is a guy that could potentially see a lot of one-on-one coverage this year. If he can beat that coverage deep down the field, all it takes is a few big plays here and there to really return that fantasy value and allow you a guy that can play in your flex position most weeks. Now, we have to wait and see how the season gets started, but he's going to be very cheap for you right now in drafts. Or he's either been left on the waiver wires, or if somebody owns him, as long as they're not watching this video, you might be able to get him for cheap. So keep all of that in mind and make a move for Tre'Quan Smith before week 1 of the season. Moving on from Tre'Quan Smith, who fantasy owners might be low on because of all the weapons around him or his inconsistencies last year, to moving on to another player who fantasy owners might be low on because of an injury that recently occurred. With David Moore of the Seattle Seahawks, he injured his shoulder a week ago, but a lot of people anticipated that he might be missing a large portion of the season. However, we've recently learned in the last few days here that not only will he miss the IR, but he might not miss that much time either. So this is a guy that's going to be virtually free on your waivers right now, or if someone has drafted him, you might be able to grab him really, really, really cheap, because when he is healthy, similar to what we talked about with Tre'Quan Smith and his work in the end zone, we could be seeing some of the same things for David Moore. Similar to Tre'Quan Smith, David Moore also has the ability to take the top off the field. Last season with the Seahawks, he had a 16.88 average depth of target, which was third in the National Football League, and he also averaged 17.12 yards per reception, third in the National Football League. But again, when he got into the red zone, got into the end zone, that is where he saw a chunk of his work. 40% of his targets were in the red zone last season. That was first in the National Football League. 26.9% of his receptions were in the red zone, 10th in the National Football League. In the end zone, basically the same thing. 24% of his targets were in the end zone, second in the National Football League, and 15.4% of his receptions were in the end zone, third in the NFL. Of his 7 red zone receptions last year, he had 5 touchdowns. Not only that, but he was one of 7 players last season that had double-digit end zone targets with at least an 80% touchdown percentage. So again, potential big plays, potential work in the end zone, potential work in the red zone. That's what we want from a lot of these late-round flyers or waiver pickups. Guys that could potentially do that can score you a lot of points. Let's say David Moore misses 2-3 weeks, right? Oh well, not that big of a deal. You got him cheap. It's not like you're spending a first-round pick on him. Like if you're Ezekiel Elliott owner and spend a first-round pick, maybe you miss him for a few weeks. Still think he shows up for week 1. However, with David Moore, he misses a few weeks, but he's a guy you got off waivers. He's a guy you traded for cheap. He's a guy that you drafted probably your last pick of the draft. If any of those things are true, stash him on your bench for a few weeks and wait and see what happens. DK Metcalf is there. Obviously, he could end up taking some targets away from Moore. But again, we've seen rookie wide receivers struggle, right? DK Metcalf, he's dealing with an injury as well right now. He could end up missing some time. So if Moore can get back before him and establish himself, that would be excellent. Obviously, we're not going anywhere with Tyler Lockett, right? We like Tyler Lockett. He's going to be there. He's going to be working. But these guys got to get healthy. If they get healthy around Russell Wilson, if this is a guy, David Moore, who can, get towards maybe 7 or 8 touchdowns this year, again, like Tre'Quan Smith, provide some big plays, we could be looking at a potential breakout for him. We just need him to get healthy, so we are going to be watching this news like a hawk over the next week or two. All right, last one for you. And this is a name that we've brought up quite a bit on this channel. But we are not going to give up on Tevin Coleman yet. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I did do a video that included Matt Breida. And we do think that Matt Breida is going to have some type of consistent role in this offense. But we still don't know what it is. And if Breida were to get hurt for any reason, Tevin Coleman is the guy. Now, he still might even be the guy to start the season. If he can get off to a fast start and hold Breida off, he'll be fine. But what are some things that have us leaning towards a potential breakout for Tevin Coleman? He's played well in Atlanta, don't get me wrong, but he hasn't had that huge season that a lot of fantasy owners thought were coming. Now that he's reunited with Kyle Shanahan, will it finally happen? Potentially, but here's why. So with Tevin Coleman, this stat I got from Pro Football Focus, and it's called their breakaway percentage. And what that shows is which runners earn the highest percent of their yards on big plays. And big plays to them is 15 plus yards on designed runs. Last season, Tevin Coleman was second in the NFL with a 48.5% breakaway percentage. That was second in the NFL to only Saquon Barkley, who was 54%. So Tevin Coleman last season, when he touched the ball, a lot of his production came on those big plays. But it wasn't just that. What did he do in the red zone last season? Now, don't get me wrong. I understand these are two completely different offenses. He played for the Falcons last year. He's going to be playing for the 49ers now. But again, he's Kyle Shanahan's boy. These two have been together. He's been in this offense before when it was in Atlanta. And Kyle Shanahan still knows what he can do, and he saw what he did in Atlanta last season. So even if Breakout, for some reason, were to carve out a decent workload, Tevin Coleman, when we get into the red zone, could end up being the guy they rely on the most. He was tied for 4th last season with 11 red zone retargets. He was tied for 7th with 8 red zone receptions, and he was tied for 3rd with 4 red zone touchdowns, and that was among running backs only. Not only that, but he had the highest percent of targets in the red zone last season with 27.5%, and he had the highest reception percentage in the red zone last season at 25%. He was 3rd in target percentage in the end zone, 5%, and he was 2nd in reception percentage in the end zone with 3.1%. So again, I understand different offenses. So please don't comment in the comments and say, Kyle, these were two completely different offenses. I get it. I understand that. But again, he was successful in the red zone and the end zone last season. He was a weapon that was used when they got down closer to the goal line. That could end up happening this season. Yeah, you've got George Kittle, but do the 49ers have another weapon on that offense that you look at and you say, man, that is a guy that can win in the end zone repeatedly? They can set Tevin Coleman up for success when they get to the red zone. He could be a big factor there. And if he has that big of a breakaway percentage where he's going to get a lot of his yards on big plays, he could end up being a little inconsistent. But again, if you were to draft him, or trade for him, more than likely he's not going to be on waivers. He's going to be a guy that's drafted. So if you draft him or you trade for him, again, this is not a guy that you're expecting to be your running back too. However, he could be a weekly flex play. And if anything were to happen to Matt Breida where he goes down with an injury, now you have a solid running back too on your team. So keep an eye on him. If you've already drafted, don't overspend to try and get Tevin Coleman. If you have not drafted yet, don't buy him in the 4th or 5th round. Wait a little bit longer. But Tevin Coleman is still a guy that you can get at a realistically decent price right now, but has a lot of potential, a lot of breakout potential for 2019, especially if he takes over any type of full-time role. All right, I know I throw a ton of information out at you right there, but you know what? That's how we do it here on the Fantasy Headliners. We keep these things short and sweet with a ton of information to get you ready for the fantasy football season so you can win yourself a championship this year. Make sure you do a couple of things before leaving the video, though. Make sure you hit that like button. Most importantly, though, hit that subscribe button. If you do and you become a part of Headliner Nation today, let us know in the comments below. I want to personally welcome you. And if you're already a part of Headliner Nation, make sure you welcome anyone in the comments below that says they are new to the channel. One of the greatest, if not the greatest, fantasy football community we have assembled here at the Fantasy Headliners. Thanks so much for checking out this episode of the Fantasy Headliners, and I'll see you on the next one. Ladies and gentlemen, it's almost time for kickoff. Have a good one. Football community. We're going to start that over. Into the red zone and towards the end zone. A breakout candidate. Along the lot of the bah. And you know what? Jake left me. I'm trying to throw you under the bus and I can't do it.